Hi, this clip just briefly shows you how to calculate the weighted average cost of capital. So if a company needs funds, where do they get it from? They could either borrow the money from the bank or from anywhere else, that's called debt, or the investors could give more money, that's equity, so they could issue more shares. So you all know about debt and equity. Now, what does it cost us to have debt? Well, if the bank charges interest, the interest would be the cost. So let's assume we borrow from the bank at 10%. Does equity have a cost? Remember, that's money from the shareholders. Well, the cost of equity is the required rate of return. So the shareholders might require 18%. Why would they require more than the bank? Remember, the return that they require would be dependent on the risk. So for the bank, there's less risk because they protect it with the loan agreements. So they might have covenants in place and they have fixed payment terms. They get certain cash flows at specific dates in the future. And if the company does not pay them, they have legal recourse to get their money back. The investors, on the other hand, buys shares in the company or invest in the company, and they wait for dividend payments. And if the company does not earn a profit, they don't have to pay any dividends. So the risk is more for the shareholders. So they require a higher return than the bank. So now, how do we calculate the total cost of all these different types of funding? Well, if half of the company was funded by debt, so 50%, and then the other half was funded by equity, also 50%, that would be easy. 10% times 50% is 5%, and then 10 times 18 is 9, so 5 plus 9 is 14, which is exactly in the middle. So the average of the bank's 10% and the investors' 18%. So that's just a straight average. But what if the debt portion is 60% and the equity only 40%? That means the return would be weighted towards the debt side. So it would be slightly less than the middle or the 14%. Now remember, the interest payments are tax deductible. So for the company, the cost is not actually 10%, it will be 10% less the tax shield that they get. So 10% times 0.72 if the tax rate is 28%. So it's slightly less than the 10%. Equity or dividends are not tax deductible, so that will remain 18%. Now, how do we calculate the weighted average? If debt is weighted 60%, so slightly more than half, and equity is 40, slightly less than half. So we apply the 60% weighting to the cost of debt, 7.2, and then we apply the 40% weighting to the cost of equity. And now you can see the weighted average of both types of funding is 11.52%. And that is the weighted average cost of all the financing. So in the next clip, I'll show you how to determine the weights of debt and equity. So there's three ways we can to do the weightings. It's either the target capital structure, the capital structure based on market values of debt and equity, and then the capital structure based on book values of debt and equity. And that is the priorities or the ranking of the priorities of the calculation of WACC or the weightings of the WACC. Then also, I'll show you how to calculate the cost of debt and the different ways to calculate the cost of equity.